information is. And then what we'll do after that is go into a breakout groups based on the colors of your folders and your little dots that you have in your folders, and have an opportunity to work through the questions that are on the back of the page. And ultimately what we want you to come up with as a group are your top 3 points for short and long-term action for this community. And then after the coffee break, we'll come back and do a bit of a reporting out in a slightly different way, trying to apply some of those to your own communities. So it'll be an opportunity to discuss some of those actions and how they might apply to you in your own community. So what I would ask you to do, well, we'll get into the detail of the breakout groups after Eric, I think, completes his presentation. So I'll turn it over to Eric now. Eric is another retiree who sits around and doesn't do a whole lot. And if you know Eric, you know that's not true too. So I really appreciate Eric. Eric had a lot on his plate. He was up for the BCWWA. He had a family wedding. He had visitors from Scotland, and kind of dumped this on his lap. So I really appreciate the time and effort that Eric put in and his thoughtfulness in preparing this case study for us to work with today. Please welcome Eric.
I'm going to keep my presentation sharp and to the point. But first of all, I know some of you from my background. I'll just say a little bit about that. I was, before retiring, with the Ministry of Community Outreach and Women's Services, and I was involved with infrastructure. And I would see projects coming across our table for applications all through this province. And it rang a bell with what we're talking about here, about sometimes we find getting ourselves into places with infrastructure, and perhaps we should be taking other steps. I'm not saying infrastructure does not have its place. I'm saying it's a combination of approaches to how we solve our problems. The second thing, in the little community I'm in, I'm on the Advisory Planning Commission. I'm chair of the Stewardship Foundation. And I make that point because as the stewardship group in our community, it can be put in positive and negative lights, but we are very positive and proactive of how we assist our community in the Highlands. We've been involved with lake stewardship. We're involved with, which I'll present to you today, a energy and water conservation program, taking it to our council with some suggestions, and we'll see where it goes from there. So, give you a quick overview. Where we're looking at, just to focus right in, District of Highlands. I think most of you know the geography. This is obviously Victoria down here. District of Highlands is shaded in that green area there. And to give you a better feel for it, this aerial photograph really tells the story. You can see the development is taking place in Victoria here, in Langford to the south here, pushing up towards the Highlands, and of course up through the peninsula itself. There's still quite a bit of agriculture here, but development is certainly encroaching. Now the point I want to make here is that the role of the Highlands has been decided. I'm not saying it's like Eric talked about, nothing's concrete, nothing's for sure, but the role of the Highlands has been decided in the regional growth strategy as a green belt area. And the point here is that this is getting roundly challenged by what I call death by 1,000 cuts. In other words, you can have a vision, but how can you retain that vision into the future what is the common sense of the group, of the community, of that's what they wish. So, looking at this here, this is very typical of areas like Oslo and I think in Auckland, where what I call purposeful planning, to have this as green belt. And yet, as I say, unless we have that long-term vision, that vision will surely change. So I'm bringing this up just because it's the Highlands, but you all have your own problems of different nature in your own communities. So not to spend a lot of time here, but to show through the zoning area, there's a provincial park through here. There's a lot of large acreages in here, which are now being questioned in the rezoning from 30 acres down to 10.5. And these are what we call the rural residential areas. So that gives you just a sense in a quick form of what the land use is. Sense of the Highlands, of course, it is a very pleasant pleasant place, and I use this not as a NIMBY expression. I feel very passionate about this when people say this is just NIMBY, you live there. I'm saying it's visionary. It's long-term thinking to try and retain this area designated as green space, if possible, into the future. Now, this just shows some of the shots of the Gallanton Park and the lakes, and this is our local, this is our municipal hall actually, in the Highlands. So, the regional growth strategy is written up as to preserve large areas of green space, to protect the green and blue space, provide outdoor recreational space, rural acreages, primary residential, and this is not my statement, a statement in the strategy, no role for urban development. However, having said that, the census of the last 5 years in the CRD, the increase in population in the Highlands has been 17%, which is higher than any of the other 13 municipalities. Now, we could have to look at the statistics of that because we only have some 1,870 people, so you can a small change in that can show up as a statistic, which is got some skew to it. But nevertheless, there is a lot of development happening within the area. The critical factor, if there's one point, and that's what all our discussion about, is water. In the case of the Highlands, there is no infrastructure, there's no centralized system, and I offered to do this presentation because I think it's typical of a lot of areas, in small rural areas in the province. We've got wells, we've got septic systems, and each individually, of course, responsible in their own lot. The problem in the bigger picture is that we've got fractured bedrock, and we don't have much in the way of we don't have any snowpack to consider. We have rainfall, so the capture is captured in this fractured bedrock, and we have fairly low aquifer productivity, a high dependence on it, and increasing aquifer development with, of course, the desire for more development. Add to that, of course, climate change, and we have a situation where we have to make some long-term planning decisions. So what is the challenge? The challenge then is to honor the community vision. Now the community vision as it stands right now, unless we choose to go another route, and that's kind of possible too, is to retain it as a rural community, keep the green space integrity, to protect the groundwater, and continually reflect that vision in the OCP and the regional growth strategy. And, if possible, avoid centralized infrastructure. The challenge is, what I call death by 1,000 cuts, is to avoid urban sprawl and look at the short and long-term planning context together. Community participation, I've mentioned in stewardship, appropriate land use, dealing with conflict, and daring to use this word that Robert used this morning, is limits to growth. Now, what is happening in the Highlands? Some of you may be aware of it. There's a very large development taking place on our boundaries in Langford, and it's called the Bear Mountain Project. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a huge development. It's of vision of something similar to Whistler. They've got 2,200 doors. It's a large hotel and major development in hand right now. If we look at what is happening, I went up around Finlayson, and this is the view, of course, of the development that's happening in Bear Mountain. Turn 180 degrees and look into the Highlands. This is what you're looking at. The second phase of the Bear Mountain project is to put another 18 holes into the Highlands, plus residential development. That immediately raises issues about ability to deliver water, and in that sense, there's some discussion right now of extending the CRD pipe into the Highlands to capture and service this phase of the project. That raises the question, and that's why I put it in this form to you, where does that end? Does that mean the big pipe goes from the Highlands into the heart of the Highlands and continue with more development? So what are the planning principles? And this is the situation with our OCP principles here. Our first one is to protect the environment, to maintain the rural character, to support economic diversification, protect long-term economic sustainability, and affordable public services and facilities. And finally, to encourage local participation. So those are the kind of broad planning principles we have in our official community plan. So what are our options? The options are none. Line in the sand, nothing happens, no more development. Well, clearly that is unreasonable, because that's just not how it works. Secondly, unfettered development. That just simply means carrying on like we are, moving from groundwater situation to infrastructure situation, and changing the face of the community itself. The third one is to look at a measured approach, working to the OCP principles and ensuring that we choose where we develop within the constraints of the Highlands itself. And the fourth one is to talk about moving to limits to growth. Is that realistic? Can we do it in the longer term? So what we have done, and I mentioned earlier in my presentation there, that we're looking at a water energy conservation program. This has been generated by the stewardship group, and this is not the total solution, but the challenge we have is that because we've got no centralized infrastructure, we have to look at a model which rotates around the individual house owner. So we're looking at an educational program that includes water and energy, which includes a conservation program on sewage systems, wells, low flush toilets and shower heads, a house visit program to encourage people to participate, and of course looking at one of the latest issues, rainwater harvesting. So we've presented this to our council, and they are very keen on this process, and we're in the point now of just developing this program. So in conclusion, I referred to Alice in Wonderland in her comment that if you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. And I think this is a situation that we're finding is that we have to look to that future, that long-term plan, as we talked about, backcasting to this stage right now, and deciding what steps we should take to preserve the long-term goals of the community. So with that, I'll just wrap up. Thank you.
We're not going to give an